That day, a remarkable girl appeared at the orphanage. Everyone was left breathless by her beauty, but Arendor froze as if she'd just heard shocking news about her idol. She immediately recognized this as the Duke's daughter. Seriously, why is she here of all places? Arendor recalled that just yesterday, she was still a sharp field agent at intelligence headquarters. But after a whole week without a single assignment, she suspected she'd been sidelined, so she stormed into the office to voice her frustration. Little did she expect that after just a few words, her boss snapped his fingers and reassigned her to a colleague's team. Following the intelligence, Arendor Ninjalith made her way to the Duke's estate. In her mind, the Duke's cold gaze still haunted her like a bad memory from an online class. But with years of professional training, she quickly composed herself and switched into full Sherlock Holmes mode, analyzing the situation at hand. In the dead of night, soldiers gathered, and it felt like drama was about to break out. Before long, the gates of the Duke's estate opened, and a luxurious carriage rolled in. Two men dressed in black stepped down, and the Duke greeted them with a warm smile. These were clearly no ordinary guests. Just as Arendor was about to switch into her secret agent mode and continue surveilling, a sharp blade suddenly blocked her path. The man standing before her was none other than the cold-hearted prince, the Duke's eldest son, Lucius. "If you don't reveal your identity now, I'll send you off to lose your memory permanently." Arendor froze, her mind screaming, "Wait, what is happening?" Her fellow agents had confirmed Lucius wouldn't be here today. Had she been set up? Forced to find an escape, Arendor pretended to attack Lucius, planning to turn and flee. But life rarely goes as planned. Lucius saw through her ruse, and with a powerful strike, he sliced off the mask covering Arendor's face. "It's you? What in the world is going on?" Face to face, memories rushed back like a film in slow motion, and her true identity was completely exposed. In that moment, Arendor only wanted to run before things got any worse, but the instant she turned to flee, a sudden blow struck her. Her body was pierced by magic, blood pouring out, the scene playing out like the dramatic finale of an episode. Seeing this, Lucius rushed forward and caught Arendor in his arms, calling her name for the first time in his life, his voice trembling like a broken microphone during a live stream. But it was already too late. Regret consumed him completely. And then it was all just a dream. Trapped in the nightmare, Arendor struggled endlessly, the scenes blurring together like a hazy midday reverie. Not until a beam of sunlight touched her did she finally wake, still dazed and disoriented. Looking around at the worn curtains and the rickety old bed of the orphanage, she realized with a shock that she had been reborn. Afterward, Arendor trailed behind Emily toward the dining hall. Though she felt no hunger, she still took her portion of food and immediately handed it to the child beside her. "Here, it's yours. I'm just not in the mood to eat." This scene unfortunately caught Thomas's eye. Relying on his larger build, he pursed his lips and issued a blunt order. "Emily, hand over your food right now." Arendor frowned, about to speak up, when a white-haired boy appeared, his manner lazy, but his words razor-sharp. "Do you want the headmaster to scold you? Stay out of other people's business, Jack." Thomas's eyes went wide. These two were usually as silent as one mute meeting one deaf, and now suddenly he's playing the hero saving the damsel? Did he think this wouldn't make him lose face? Unable to contain his anger, he lunged forward and snatched the bread from the child's hand. Arendor could barely hold herself back, nearly charging in to teach him a swift lesson in decent behavior, but Emily quickly grabbed her arm. "Please don't make a scene, Arendor. If you get punished, I'll feel terrible." Seeing the worry in Emily's eyes, Arendor swallowed her anger and stepped back. "Fine, I'll spare him this once." By the afternoon shift, Arendor began to feel a gnawing hunger, as if her stomach were staging its own protest. But remembering the delighted look on the child's face that morning, she consoled herself with a glass of water instead. Besides, having just been reborn, she had no real appetite for food anyway. Just then, Jack walked over, crossed his arms, and looked at Arendor as if she'd committed the greatest wrongdoing in the universe. "Hey, are you an idiot? You gave your bread away, so what are you going to eat now, heir?" Arendor stayed silent, her indifferent eyes seeming to say, "Think whatever you like." Jack studied her for a few more seconds, then unexpectedly pulled out a loaf of bread and split it in front of her. "Eat it. If you don't, I'll throw it away." What an arrogant guy, Arendor muttered to herself, but she still took the bread. After all, thanks anyway. Suddenly, the headmaster's voice echoed from outside, drawing everyone's attention. Jack and Arendor exchanged glances, then followed the crowd out. The first thing that caught Arendor's eye was the headmaster leading a small, delicate girl by the hand, her eyes wide with confusion. Diana. In that instant, Arendor's mind froze for a full 5 seconds. This child, wasn't she the Duke's daughter? What an unbelievable coincidence, she muttered, feeling as though time itself were rewinding before her eyes. Arendor had first met Diana at this very orphanage. Back then, Diana cried constantly and everyone avoided her like the plague. Even Arendor herself hadn't wanted to get involved. And yet, Diana had always stuck close to her, with an innocent but stubborn gaze, as if Arendor were someone she simply couldn't help but cling to. Arendor remembered thinking, if only she hadn't been so cold back then, if only she'd been gentler with Diana, perhaps the future wouldn't have turned out so brutal. The Duke wouldn't have torn this orphanage apart, and she herself wouldn't have become a beggar, drifting through the shadows overnight. With that thought, she instinctively switched into big sister mode and eagerly stepped forward to ask the girl's age. "Little one, how old are you?" Diana looked up, blinked her long lashes, and held up 4 tiny fingers with utmost seriousness. "I'm 4. Arendor froze for a few seconds, feeling as if her sense of logic had just been bent out of shape. Looking at Diana's small, dirty hands, she instinctively took hold of them. "Come on, let's go get you washed up. We'll talk once you're clean." In the orphanage's simple bathroom, Arendor gently wiped Diana's face. The girl cooperated obediently, watching her with wide, innocent eyes. That gaze struck something tender in Arendor's heart, as if she were looking at her own past self, lost yet still hoping to be loved. Once the grime was washed away, Diana's beauty was revealed so clearly it left Arendor stunned. Her silky white hair and bright blue eyes made it obvious without any DNA test needed that she was the Duke's daughter. Oh my, the headmaster always calls us foolish, but now I see he's the biggest fool of all. After cleaning Diana's face, Arendor continued helping her wash her hands and body. Diana's small legs were covered in old and fresh scars alike, a sight both pitiful and infuriating. Perhaps out of embarrassment, Diana grew fidgety, her tiny hands twisting the hem of her worn dress. "Don't worry, I know how to heal these wounds." Arendor comforted her, her smile gentle but full of certainty. Diana's eyes widened, expecting Arendor to blow on the wound the way children usually do to soothe pain. But to her surprise, in an instant, a stream of blue magic suddenly appeared over Diana's small legs. The magic spread gently like a cool breeze, sweeping away every ugly scar. Diana's legs returned to a smooth, baby-soft state, leaving her staring in wide-eyed astonishment. "Wait, sister, are you a witch?" Diana asked timidly, her eyes sparkling as if she'd just spotted a living idol. "Yes, though only a limited edition witch." Arendor smiled slyly, a hint of pride in her grin. A small flicker of pride passed through Arendor's heart. Thankfully, a master had once taught her magic. Though her power was weak, she could still put it to good use healing minor wounds. This time, whether because of her rebirth or not, she wasn't exhausted after using magic. Instead, she felt her power surge by several levels. If I can protect Diana from now on, maybe everything will turn out differently, Arendor thought to herself, a rare glint of determination in her eyes. Right after, Diana launched herself into her arms like a bullet. The warmth of the little girl's body made Arendor, who had just reset her life the day before, feel as relaxed as if she'd been fully recharged. But before she could enjoy the moment for long, she sensed something was off. It turned out that exactly 1 week later was the day the Duke sent people to the orphanage. The headmaster, a heartless villain who wanted to sell Diana to slave traders, had hidden the girl away to cover his tracks. And so the entire orphanage fell victim to a scheme, wrongfully blamed and reduced to tears. Arendor gritted her teeth, clenched her fists, her eyes burning like headlights. No way. Before this story spirals into darkness, I have to make a sharp turn. That night, the two of them shared a bed, but since Diana didn't get her bedtime story, she tossed and turned like a fish out of water. The girl's eyes widened as she stared at the red gemstone hanging on Arendor's chest, a mysterious necklace Arendor had worn since before she was abandoned. Arendor intended to keep wearing it until she found her birth parents. But the problem now was that it had a huge crack running through it. Arendor's heart ached at the sight, and before she could even sigh, Diana grabbed her hand, nodding encouragingly. "Don't be sad, sister. It still looks gorgeous on you." Wait, this is the first time anyone's ever called me pretty. As a child, every time she looked in the mirror, Arendor used to marvel to herself. I'm just so incredibly beautiful. Her long pink hair drifted gently in the wind, her pink eyes soft as a sunset glow, and everywhere she looked, she saw a heroine with an elegant, refined presence. But one thing puzzled her for years. No one around her ever called her beautiful. Arendor shrugged it off, telling herself, they're probably just jealous. It's fine. Until one day, she overheard her best friend gushing over someone else's hair. Wow, your hair is so gorgeous. Arendor couldn't help herself and immediately spoke up. Does that mean my hair isn't pretty? Her friend blinked, then delivered a line that felt like salt on an open wound. Well, aside from your hair being a bit healthy, this short brown color doesn't really scream beautiful. Wait, brown? The words hit her like an 800-degree shockwave, her hand trembling so badly the water bucket she held crashed to the ground. She bent down, staring at the puddle on the floor as if verifying the very truth of her existence. That can't be right. Her hair was clearly pink. Unable to believe her own eyes, Arendor rushed out into the street, stopping anyone who passed by. Friend, look closely. What color are my hair and eyes? But every single answer she got was the same. Brown. It's brown. Both are brown. Completely frozen in shock, what on earth was happening? Refusing to accept it, she even hired a high-level witch to examine her, but the result never changed. Brown hair, brown eyes. Arendor wondered, what kind of cruel joke am I living in? But this was no time to dwell on such matters. She took a deep breath, gently stroked Diana's head, and told herself, this isn't the moment to overthink. Protecting this child matters more. The next morning, breakfast proceeded as usual. Diana quickly finished her own bread, but moments later, her eyes lit up as she secretly stared at Arendor's portion like a kitten begging for food. Arendor sighed, then quietly slid her own bread over to Diana. Farewell, my beloved breakfast, she consoled herself. Growing children need to eat. I can go without a little longer. That afternoon, after skipping breakfast entirely, Arendor officially shut down by evening. Starving to the point of dizziness, feeling as though she might collapse at any moment, she could barely sense any magic left in her. But being poor meant enduring hardship, so she still dragged herself out to the river on the outskirts to do laundry. Yet just one glimpse of Diana's sweet smile instantly restored her spirit. All right, we can conquer the whole world. With renewed determination, Arendor threw herself into washing clothes. But just as she wrung out the second shirt, a series of swishing sounds nearby broke her concentration. She turned to look, and it was Jack. Ha, this kid had been diligently training with a sword here since childhood. No wonder he'd go on to become one of the Empire's 3 greatest knights, seemingly destined to become Diana's most loyal knight. But while the two of them were secretly watching him, Jack suddenly looked up, his sharp eyes sweeping over them. What are you two doing hiding over there? Busted, having been caught, Arendor reluctantly stepped forward. Jack crossed his arms, staring at her with a helpless sigh. Giving your bread away to someone else again? That kid is both messy and eats way too much. Don't you realize she'll eat your hand off next? Without another word, Jack pulled half a loaf of bread from his bag and tossed it straight at Arendor. Eat it. Stop always thinking about other people. Remember to eat your own share, too. Arendor hugged the bread, stunned into silence for 3 seconds. That's oddly touching. But before she could thank him, Jack turned and started scolding Diana without mercy. Hey, you little one! She went hungry for your sake, so how do you plan to repay her? Diana instantly put on her most innocent expression, blinking at Arendor for help. Arendor quickly changed the subject. By the way, are you training with a sword here because you want to become a knight? But Jack just shrugged, answering indifferently. A knight? Too exhausting. I just want to be a mercenary. No need for fame as long as there's money. Arendor looked at Jack and burst out laughing. You've got so much enthusiasm. It's clearly your destiny to become a knight. Don't dream of being some small-time mercenary. Keep at it. Jack choked up, wanting to argue back, but his face flushed red on its own. Whether from anger or embarrassment, no one could tell. In the end, he just gritted his teeth, grabbed the water bucket, and walked ahead, quietly leading the way like a silent knight. A future knight, yet at present just a young man forced onto the path of righteousness. On the way back, walking too fast made Arendor's legs start to ache. Diana had also grown exhausted, gazing up at her with big puppy dog eyes, blinking pleadingly. Sister, carry me. Jack grumbled. Hey now, kid, are you trying to work her to death? Without waiting for Diana's response, he sighed and crouched down. Climb on, both of you. Arendor was baffled. Wait, really? Diana exclaimed. Are you serious? Thinking he was joking, Arendor was shocked when Jack actually carried them both on his back like a warrior. Arendor sat behind, Diana held on in front, and Jack carried the 2 sacks on his back straight to the orphanage. Luckily, no one saw them along the way, or else the 3 of them would have become the stuff of orphanage legend. After returning, before parting ways, Arendor sincerely thanked Jack. This boy, actually younger than her, had taken such careful care of her ever since her rebirth. What was wrong with her in her past life that she never noticed this kid's shining character? While Arendor was still touched, boom. The moment they stepped through the door, they were met with the headmaster's scrutinizing gaze. He stood right in front of the door like a final boss waiting in a game. You're under house arrest and you dare wander off? Arendor stood tall, her gaze cold as ice, as if she feared nothing in this world. The headmaster asked nothing further, instead turning to her with a low voice. How old are you this year? Arendor blinked, sensing something was off. Still, she answered calmly. 8. The headmaster suddenly broke into a strange smile. As if he just remembered something important, he immediately turned and hurried away. Arendor watched him go but didn't dwell on it much. After all, he was about to die soon anyway. Soon the Duke would arrive here. He would find Diana and Jack in the attic, and then end the headmaster's life with a single sword strike. At the same time, at the Duke's estate. The air was as taut as a bowstring, every anxious gaze fixed on the man delivering his report. My lord, every orphanage and back alley in the Empire has been thoroughly searched, but there is still no trace of the young lady. The man seated in the seat of power, his eyes as sharp as a hawk's, tapped his fingers lightly on the table. His voice dropped low, carrying immense weight. Keep investigating. Search every boat docked nearby. Leave no place unchecked. If necessary, dig up the very ground. His subordinates trembled, wishing they could sprout extra legs to move faster. He recalled that just days ago his daughter had suddenly vanished amid a crowded festival. At first, everyone assumed it was simply a case of getting lost, but the deeper they searched, the more terrifying the truth became. Many days had passed, and the trail remained as murky as a moonless night. That night, once Diana had fallen asleep, Arendor quietly slipped out of the room, moving like a professional assassin, without a sound, without a trace. Anyone who saw her would surely mistake her for the protagonist of a detective novel. Her target was the headmaster's office. Once inside, she quickly rifled through the records, but aside from a pile of corruption evidence typical of those in power, there was nothing about Diana. Tuh, the headmaster really is a professional embezzler, but Arendor was no amateur either. She took a deep breath, focused her mind, and activated a sensing spell. Instantly, a faint fluctuation of energy beneath the floor caught her attention. She lifted the carpet, and just as she suspected, a hidden compartment appeared. Inside was an ornate chest, clearly no ordinary item. She opened the chest and quickly flipped through the pages inside, and then, this name. Arendor's eyes went dark. This was a name she recognized from her time at the Intelligence Bureau, a notorious slave trader who had once shaken the entire empire. Without hesitation, Arendor activated a copying spell. But the moment she began the incantation, blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Oh no, am I trading my own life for this? The spell consumed so much energy that she nearly collapsed from exhaustion. But it didn't matter. Once she started something, she was going to see it through. Despite her body feeling utterly drained, she forced herself to finish this crucial task. A few days later. Early in the morning, sunlight streamed gently through the window, carrying a soft warmth. But for Arendor, every morning was the same, broom in hand, gaze distant, her mind wandering far away. Being human was hard enough, and being the protagonist of a story who still had to sweep floors made it twice as hard. Still, after her break into the headmaster's office, her strength had nearly fully recovered. If a fight broke out now, she felt confident she could take on the whole orphanage. She had barely finished chatting with her roommate when, as if triggered by some lazy detecting radar, the headmaster appeared out of nowhere. That's quite enough, he barked, his voice louder than the neighborhood loudspeaker on a Monday morning. Do you kids think this is a tea house? Go bring the new girl to me right now. Arendor frowned. Not this again. She glanced over at the other children, sensing something wasn't right. Today was the day the Duke was set to visit, and nothing could be allowed to derail the plan. Arendor hurried to find Diana to prepare their escape. But the moment she saw the girl, Arendor froze completely. "Kid, did you just wrestle with the dirt, or are you cosplaying a cave woman?" Diana was covered head to toe in grime, her hair tangled like a bird's nest. Arendor quickly crouched down to check on her, relieved to find she'd only fallen. But just as she started to breathe a sigh of relief, "Grab her." The headmaster had appeared out of nowhere, his face twisted like he'd just swallowed the bitterest gourd imaginable. "Hand her over to me," he roared, his eyes blazing with fury. "Absolutely not." Arendor immediately wrapped her arms around Diana like a mother bear protecting her cub, refusing to let go. The air grew as taut as a bowstring. Then Jack appeared, standing firmly between them and the headmaster, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "Headmaster, please stop." The headmaster looked at Jack, then without a word, swung his fist straight into the boy's face. A sharp crack, and Jack collapsed on the spot. Arendor's eyes went wide. "Wait, is this seriously how it's going down?" The headmaster glared, still refusing to listen. "Fine then. All of you can rot right here." He then dragged all three of them up to the attic and slammed the door shut. The attic, where only faint light seeped through the wooden slats. Arendor quickly checked on Diana. Thankfully, the girl only had minor scrapes, but Jack was different. He'd been knocked unconscious. The attic was dark and dusty, with only a few weak rays of sunlight filtering through gaps in the roof. It felt like a message from the universe itself, reminding Arendor, why wait for someone to save you when you can save yourself? Without overthinking it, she rolled up her sleeves, took a deep breath, and started tearing the place apart. "Sorry, attic, but this isn't the time to play nice." She poured all her strength into striking the weakest point of the wooden planks. Each blow sent dust flying, the wood creaking and groaning as if fighting back. But unfortunately for the roof, it had no say in the matter. Whether the Duke arrived sooner or later, no one could predict what might happen before then. To survive, she'd have to rely on herself. Fortunately, all that blood, sweat, and effort weren't wasted. The final planks gave way, crashing down with a thunderous noise. Arendor turned to Diana, gripping the girl's hand tightly. "While I'm gone, take good care of Jack, all right?" Her voice was firm, her eyes blazing with determination. "I promise I'll bring your father here." Diana bit her lip, worry shimmering in her wide eyes. But before she could say anything more, Arendor had already leapt down, like a war god suddenly injected with superhuman speed. At the same time, at the orphanage gate, a procession of knights in gleaming armor rode in on horseback, led by the Duke, his expression cold, his sharp eyes scanning every corner. He arched an eyebrow slightly. Could there really be a slave trader bold enough to operate right in this territory? The knight captain quickly reported, "We've searched everywhere, but there's still no trace of the young lady." The Duke fell silent for a moment, then waved his hand. "You've all worked hard. Bring the headmaster out here." The headmaster mustered his courage and stepped forward, sweat pouring down his face, his expression the picture of forced calm as he faced the procession of knights. The children in the orphanage all dropped to their knees at once, each one bowing their heads while failing to hide their fear. A single glance was enough for the Duke to understand something was wrong here. Even without direct evidence about his daughter, the headmaster looked far too suspicious, especially with those shifty eyes searching for an escape route. The Duke didn't rush. He stepped forward and asked calmly, "Has anyone here seen a girl with white hair and blue eyes?" The children exchanged glances, hesitant. The headmaster, however, looked different, his face pale as untouched paper, stammering, his eyes filled with panic as he hastily urged the children to answer quickly. After the Duke's question, all the children in the orphanage answered in unison. "We haven't seen her, my lord." Their tone was suspiciously uniform, too rehearsed, sounding like a chorus that had practiced for days on end. The Duke narrowed his eyes. Something was definitely off. But before he could say anything more, boom, an immense surge of magic suddenly erupted through the air. The air shook as though someone had blasted a bass speaker directly inside everyone's head. Waves of magical energy swept across the orphanage grounds, resonating powerfully with the Duke, giving him a strange sense of connection. His gaze darkened. "May I go inside and take a look?" The question sounded polite, but the overwhelming pressure behind it made clear that if the headmaster dared refuse, he'd vanish on the spot. Inside the orphanage. Following the trail of magic, the Duke made his way further in. Partway through, he suddenly stopped. Before him lay a girl, unconscious on the ground. The Duke's brow furrowed. Why is there a child here? And her magic, it's remarkably powerful. But he had no time to dwell on that. He quickly noticed something far more urgent. The girl's life was in grave danger. At that very moment, a cry echoed across the grounds. Wah! 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 Help! The sound erupted, shaking the entire orphanage as if someone had just stolen little Diana's favorite snack. Right on schedule with Arendor's plan, the girl chose the busiest moment to unleash her full-power abandoned child crying routine. The effect was immediate. The Duke spun around on reflex, and then he froze completely. His daughter Diana was right there. The child he had searched for so desperately had suddenly appeared right before his eyes. In that instant, the Duke's icy heart felt as if it had been squeezed by an invisible hand. Without any more hesitation, he shouted, "Save her now!" On the other side, Arendor slowly began to regain consciousness. Her vision was still hazy, but the moment she spotted the Duke, her awareness snapped back into focus. Without a moment's hesitation, she dropped to her knees on the ground, her voice filled with desperate pleading. "Duke, please save my friends up in the attic." The Duke frowned, looking at her with suspicion. "The headmaster sold us to slave traders. He's a wicked man, hiding behind the mask of a good one." But the Duke still wasn't entirely convinced. The reason being, the children had already lied to him earlier. His trust had been shaken. Seeing this, Arendor didn't hesitate and immediately produced the evidence she had copied earlier. A detailed record of the headmaster's entire human trafficking network. She handed it directly to the Duke. "This is a secret ledger recording every corrupt act the headmaster committed." Her voice was firm, her eyes filled with resolve. "Corruption, bribery, selling children into slavery, it's all right here." The air seemed to freeze solid. The knights nearby gripped the hilts of their swords, ready to deal with the headmaster the moment the order was given. Arendor bowed her head, her voice carrying a slight tremor but remaining resolute. "The children are innocent. They only lied out of fear. Please, my lord, see the truth of this." On the other side, the children of the orphanage could no longer hold back either. They wept bitterly, clinging to one another, their eyes filled with hope as they looked toward the Duke. A moment of silence settled over the scene. "I understand now. All of you are pardoned." The Duke's voice was steady, yet carried undeniable authority. The children immediately burst into tears of relief. "Thank you, my lord." The Duke shook his head, his expression solemn. "This is my responsibility." But right after, he turned to glare at the headmaster, whose face had gone completely bloodless. "The one who must face punishment is that old man. Take him away." The headmaster trembled like a shivering animal, but before he could even resist, the knights seized him, bound him tightly, and dragged him off like a pitiful little rat. Everything had finally come to an end. The Duke had saved the children. At the same time, Diana dashed over to Arendor's side. "Sister Arendor, are you all right?" Worry shone in the girl's eyes, as if she were about to cry. She carefully checked every wound, every scratch on Arendor's body. Nearby, the knights could only stare in wide-eyed astonishment. Was this really their stubborn little Lady Diana? They simply couldn't believe that the young lady, usually so mischievous, could show such tenderness. Clearly, Arendor had touched something soft within Diana's heart. No one could deny it, this girl was no ordinary child. The Duke gently stroked his daughter's cheek, his eyes full of affection. "Diana, it's time to go home." The word home made Arendor flinch slightly. Her gaze lowered. When had she started thinking of Diana as her own little sister? Diana sensed it too. She immediately grabbed her father's hand, her eyes shining. "Father, I want to bring Sister Arendor home with us." The Duke looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he smiled gently. "All right, if that's what you want." She's completely spoiled, but who could blame him for loving her so much? Arendor was stunned. But just as she was about to nod in agreement, she suddenly remembered Jack. Would she be taking away the place that rightfully belonged to Jack? She bit her lip, torn inside. "Right then?" The Duke nodded slightly, his voice low. "It's fine. You may bring him along too. Arendor took a deep breath and finally made her decision. There was no home left to return to. But now she had a new path forward, for Diana and for her own life. The carriage slowly approached. The moment the door opened, a young nobleman hurried down, his face full of concern. He rushed toward Arendor, his eyes gleaming as if he'd met a celebrity. "You must be the one who saved the young lady's life," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. Arendor thought, I guess so. Right after, he pulled out a family heirloom and held it out to her. "It's my fault for failing to protect the young lady. Please accept this. I'll take whatever punishment comes my way." Arendor looked at him, suddenly recognizing him. Oh my, is this guy cosplaying a loyal knight straight out of a novel? She waved her hand, sounding utterly exhausted. "Don't be silly, punishment is unavoidable regardless. Just put that away for now." Still, she remembered him well. In her past life, he had served as the vice captain under Jack's foster father. A talented man, but so intensely loyal he'd die for his master without blinking an eye. After that touching scene, all three of them finally climbed into the carriage one by one. The moment Arendor stepped inside, she felt out of place amid the sheer overkill luxury of the interior. The seats were as soft as clouds, the light shimmered gently, and every carved detail was exquisite. All of it was something she never could have dreamed of in her past life. But when she turned to look out the window and saw the children of the orphanage waving goodbye, she found herself smiling. Thankfully, in her past life, she had once been one of them too. She still remembered clearly the feeling of standing in the shadows, watching others leave, carrying hope those children would never get to reach. But this time, she had changed her fate. The warm atmosphere, however, wouldn't last long. The Duke suddenly spoke, breaking the silence in the carriage. "I hear you're only 8 years old. I must admit, I can't help but admire your courage." The Duke narrowed his eyes, gazing at her as though trying to see straight through her. "If I hadn't found you under that attic, all of that girl's efforts would have been in vain. Caught by the headmaster, then tortured to death." Arendor shuddered slightly. He wasn't wrong. If she hadn't carried memories from her past life, there was no way an 8-year-old could have turned the tide like that. The Duke continued, his voice full of suspicion. "Before all this, did you already know Diana's identity, and mine? And how did you obtain that evidence? There are simply too many questions swirling in my mind." Arendor clenched her hands tightly. Standing before one of the most powerful men in the Empire, a single slip in her lie could cost her her life. But fortunately, she had already prepared the perfect answer. She raised her head, her voice calm. "I happened to overhear the headmaster's conversation. As for the evidence," she smiled faintly. "I secretly took it while cleaning." The Duke fell silent for a moment. Then he smiled slightly, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "You truly are a clever and kind-hearted child." Before long, they arrived at a nearby inn. The Duke hesitated briefly, then turned to the knight captain of the duchy. "Could I ask you to look after the children for me?" The knight captain was stunned. Wait, even the Duke needs help sometimes? But seeing his troubled expression, she agreed at once. "Of course, my lord." Meanwhile, Arendor and Diana had already washed up in their room, enjoying a relaxing moment with a fragrant cup of honey milk. Life could certainly use more peaceful moments like this. The knight captain pushed the door open, carrying fresh clothes for both of them. But the moment her gaze accidentally landed on Arendor's arm and noticed the clear wound on her skin, her expression darkened instantly. "Who did this?" Her voice turned icy, a chilling aura spreading through the room as if the temperature had dropped several degrees. Upon learning that the culprit was none other than the so-called respectable headmaster, she immediately made an announcement. "I'll take Arendor to the temple for treatment. My magic can only be used in combat. It's no good for healing you." Hearing this, Arendor suddenly snapped to full alertness. Wait, the person before her was none other than the one she had admired most in her past life, the legendary war knight, Bianca, a fiercely capable woman who, despite being born out of wedlock, had risen through sheer mastery of swordsmanship and unmatched combat magic to overcome every obstacle, eventually rising to the rank of countess. And now, such a legendary figure stood right in front of her, personally tending to her. Arendor felt like she was truly living the life of a fortune's favorite. Bianca crossed her arms, glancing at the two of them like a strict mother. "Your most important task right now is to eat well. Leave everything else to me." Afterward, the two of them changed into fresh clothes and headed to the dining hall. The Duke was already seated waiting. "Come sit down and eat." Arendor and Diana exchanged glances, then quickly dug into the meal. But just as the meal was going pleasantly, Bianca suddenly set down her chopsticks and announced seriously, "I must return to the duchy immediately. There's an urgent matter to handle." The atmosphere at the table stiffened slightly. The Duke frowned but said nothing. "When you arrive at the Duke's estate, I'll make sure to properly repay you for your kindness." Having only just gotten to spend a little time with her idol before having to part ways, Arendor felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. It felt just like taking a sip of bubble tea only to find all the tapioca pearls were gone. Before leaving, Bianca suddenly turned back, looking straight at Arendor with an intensely serious expression. "Would you like to come with me?" The question hit like an electric shock, causing everyone at the table to freeze mid-bite, the air going still for a second. The Duke frowned, his voice dropping low. "Bianca, what exactly do you mean by that?" Bianca calmly took a sip of water before explaining slowly. "The moment I met Arendor, I sensed magic overflowing from her body. This isn't a minor issue. If left unchecked, her health could suffer serious consequences. Given how urgent this is, she needs a mentor." It was an entirely reasonable explanation, but Diana didn't care whether the logic made sense. All that mattered was that Arendor couldn't be allowed to leave. Instantly, Diana leapt forward, wrapping her arms tightly around Arendor's arm, her eyes burning with the determination of a devoted little sister protecting her family. "Don't go. Don't leave me." The scene perfectly matched the classic sisterly bond trope from romance novels. Arendor smiled wryly. Following Bianca would certainly be the wiser choice, but it went against her original intention of staying with the Duke's family. Besides, she didn't want to leave Diana alone here either. She looked at Bianca, her gaze resolute. "Thank you for the offer, but I'd like to stay here." Bianca's brow furrowed slightly, but then she nodded, the corner of her mouth lifting as if she had already anticipated this answer. "I respect your choice, but remember what I said. If you ever want to grow stronger, come find me at the duchy. Farewell." Her words carried a note of regret, but also a lasting promise. Arendor watched Bianca's figure disappear, feeling a pang of loss, yet certain this was the right choice. In her past life, in her pursuit of recognition, she had fought with everything she had, only to be betrayed by her own comrades and die a horrific death. Revenge left unpaid isn't the way of the honorable, but for now, staying here was the better option. As for the Pilus Duchy, she knew very little, aside from one name that stood out in her mind, the Duke's son, Lucius, the last person she had seen before dying in her past life. While she was still lost in thought, the Duke gently reminded them both. "We're home." Arendor blinked, her mind still a little foggy from the long journey. As for Diana, the moment she heard the news, she lit up with excitement like a little bird, hopping down from the carriage and immediately dashing into the arms of the woman waiting by the door. "I'm home, Mother." Diana's mother spread her arms wide, holding the girl close, her eyes brimming with love. But before this touching reunion could fully play out, a voice cut through, laced with suspicion. "Hey, who are you? Why are you clinging to my little sister? Do you have some kind of scheme?" Turning to look, she found a young man standing with his arms crossed, his expression irritated as though he'd just witnessed some outrageous act. This must be the Duke's second son, Diana's older brother. Before Arendor could respond, Diana shattered the tense atmosphere with a single-spirited declaration. "Bullying my sister is not allowed, you pest." A pest? Not just Arendor, but everyone present froze in stunned silence for a moment. Diana's brother was stunned. "What did you say?" The Duke frowned. "What?" Diana's mother furrowed her brow. "What?" Arendor sighed inwardly. Of all things to pick up, she learned that sharp tongue from the headmaster. That man truly is a dangerous influence. The Duke stroked his chin, his gaze sharp. "That man incited this, didn't he? I'll have his tongue cut out later." Inside, Arendor silently mourned for the headmaster. It seemed he had truly brought this disaster upon himself. Diana's mother stepped forward quickly, her gaze stern but her voice gentle. "Please don't speak like that in front of the children." The Duke coughed lightly. "Well, yes, that's fair enough." After hearing Diana recount everything that happened at the orphanage, the Duchess looked at Arendor with deep gratitude. "You've done so much for Diana. I'm truly thankful." Meanwhile, Alain, Diana's older brother, still couldn't accept that his sister had been taken from him. He kept calling Arendor over to interrogate her further, but she barely acknowledged him at all. And just like that, Alain was officially frozen out. From a once prominent young master, he temporarily became invisible within his own household.
The Duchess clapped her hands together, offering a gentle smile. I'll personally take care of our honored guest. Let's get you changed first, then I'll show you around the estate.
Immediately, a group of servants stepped forward, bowing respectfully. Before Arendor could even react, she was lifted right off the ground. And just like that, Arendor was carried inside on a palanquin borne by 8 servants like royalty. Diana eagerly pulled out a storybook, her eyes shining bright as headlights. It had been so long since she'd had someone read to her that she could hardly wait to shove the book into Arendor's hands. Read me a story, sister. Even just one line would do. But right at that moment, her mother gently interrupted. Not now, sweetheart. I want to take Sister Arendor somewhere. Diana's eyes widened, her lips pouting in clear discontent, but the Duchess simply smiled and immediately played her trump card. If you want to keep spending time with Sister Arendor, shouldn't you go decorate your room first? Diana paused for 2 seconds, then her eyes lit up as though she'd just uncovered a universal truth. That's right, I need to make my room beautiful. And so, while the girl busied herself deciding whether to decorate her room in a cute princess style or a cool warrior theme, the Duchess had successfully lured her away from the path. Watching this unfold, Arendor couldn't help but marvel inwardly. Diana's mother is truly something else, the perfect image of a cunning fox disguised as a gentle sheep. Walking down the grand hallway, Arendor began to feel tense. She had no idea where the Duchess was taking her, but her instincts told her this wasn't a small matter. Eventually, the two of them stopped in front of a room. As the door opened, a middle-aged man dressed in priestly robes stood waiting inside. The Duchess spoke softly. He's here on Bianca's orders to treat your wound. Arendor was surprised, so Bianca still cared about her after all. The priest said little, quickly placing his hands on her wound and beginning to channel his divine power into her, but right at that moment, nothing happened. The atmosphere suddenly turned strange. The priest frowned and tried again, but no matter what method he used, the divine power simply wouldn't flow into Arendor's body. A system error, a game bug, or had someone activated a firewall blocking the power from reaching her? The Duchess noticed this too, but she remained calm, gently stroking Arendor's head. Don't be too discouraged, we'll find another priest. But Arendor knew this wasn't simply a matter of finding the right healer. Something was wrong with her, specifically. Healing the wound was a minor concern, but if the root cause wasn't found, something far worse might happen later. Just as she was lost in thought, the Duchess suddenly turned back and popped a piece of chocolate into her mouth. The sweetness melted on her tongue, momentarily emptying Arendor's mind of all worry. The Duchess said gently, "Don't worry too much, every problem has a solution. For now, let's just cheer up a little." Afterward, the two of them returned to the dining hall, but Arendor quickly realized that the real battlefield wasn't out there. It was right here at the family dinner table. The moment she walked in, she saw Alain's face darkened, as if he'd just been struck by his own steward. Ever since she'd moved into the Duke's estate, he had fallen into a rather sorry reality. From being the powerful second son, he had become nothing more than a target for his sister's criticism. The instant he raised his voice even slightly, Diana would immediately call him out without mercy. When he tried to argue back, Diana would look at him as though he'd committed a crime against all humanity. In the end, Alain had no choice but to accept his fate, exiled to wander the streets, where at least he'd be treated with more respect than at home. Not long before that, while Arendor was still enjoying a rare, peaceful moment, Diana suddenly switched into full caretaker mode. The girl began stuffing food into Arendor's hands as though she believed Arendor would simply vanish if she wasn't properly nourished. You need to eat a lot, so you'll have the strength to fight. Am I going to war or something? This situation didn't escape Alan's notice either. He watched as Diana kept piling food onto Arendor's plate while he himself was mercilessly ignored. He was the Duke's actual son, the rightful heir. And yet in this battle for his sister's attention, all he could do was accept a bitter defeat. Either endure it in silence or face punishment through Diana's glare. In the end, he had no choice but to quietly swallow his pride, pretend not to care, and slink away in sorrow. While Alain struggled to salvage his dignity, Arendor had her own troubles. Her stomach had reached its limit. But not wanting to embarrass her new family, she forced herself to pick up the last piece of bread and finish it off. While some were happy and others sulked, no one realized that somewhere out on the streets, a certain wealthy young man was wandering around with an empty stomach, drifting like a lost traveler with nowhere to go. Back at the Duke's estate, another shocking event unfolded. Diana activated Code S emergency mode and burst into her mother's room, her face streaked with tears. "Mother, Sister Arendor is sick." The Duchess was alarmed. What? She immediately mobilized the entire royal medical team and nearly summoned the highest-ranking priest, had the servants not stopped her in time. "My lady, it's just a cold." Fortunately, it turned out to be nothing more than a common fever. Right at that moment, another figure of great importance arrived, the Empire's chief mage, Telin. The Duchess was overjoyed and asked him to treat Arendor. For a mage of his caliber, the girl's condition should have been a trivial matter. But upon examining her, he suddenly frowned, a look of suspicion crossing his face. Why does this child's body hold such powerful magic? Even the priest before him hadn't been able to channel his power into her. The room felt instantly tense. Everyone understood that if an ordinary person possessed magic this powerful, there could only be two explanations. Either she was an extraordinarily rare genius, or something far more mysterious was at play. A few days later, the Duke finally returned. The moment he stepped inside, he didn't ask anyone anything. He went straight to his wife and got right to the point. "How is the child doing?" The Duchess gently recounted everything that had happened. After listening, the Duke fell silent for a long while before asking a question that left the entire room speechless. "Should we keep this child with us?" Though they'd only lived together for a short time, the Duchess already sensed that Arendor was truly a good child. Moreover, there was something about her that reminded her in a strange way of her own husband. Before she could respond, the door suddenly clicked open. Arendor stood there, her deep eyes quietly fixed on the Duke. That gaze wasn't the gaze of an ordinary child. It wasn't a look of fear, nor was it one of innocent clarity. It was a look carrying pure determination. The Duke understood at once. This child has something to say to me. After leaving behind a single meaningful remark, the Duke led the Duchess out of the room, leaving Arendor alone to face him. The atmosphere in the room suddenly changed entirely. Gone was the Duchess's warmth. Gone was Diana's adorable chattering. Only Arendor and one powerful man remained. The Duke spoke calmly. "The headmaster, along with everyone named in that ledger, has already received a severe sentence a few days ago." Arendor's hand tightened. This was news she had already anticipated, but not what she most wanted to hear right now. She immediately asked, her voice full of anticipation. "What about Jack?" The Duke looked at her for a moment before answering, "He's made a full recovery. He'll come to visit in a few days." Arendor was stunned, that's all? She clenched her fist, looking straight at the Duke. "Jack isn't an ordinary person. He trains tirelessly, day after day at the orphanage. He has real potential." The Duke smiled slightly, as though he'd already predicted this reaction from Arendor. But he didn't push back at all. Because at that moment, his concern wasn't Jack. What he wanted to know was what Arendor thought about her own future. "You already know the condition of your own body," the Duke said slowly. "Your magic capacity is extraordinarily high, and that's something well worth nurturing." Arendor didn't respond right away, but she understood exactly what this meant. "I can sponsor you?" It was an offer that would tempt just about anyone. Having the Duke's backing meant access to resources, wealth, power, and a high standing in society. But for Arendor, that wasn't what she wanted. Accepting a noble's patronage would mean becoming dependent on them. And Arendor had never wanted to be dependent on anyone. She needed freedom. So she quickly came up with the most reasonable excuse to decline. "Right now, I only want to stay by Diana's side, serving as her handmaid." It was an incredibly modest answer, showing no ambition whatsoever. The Duke's brow furrowed instantly. "Understood, it's your choice." From the look in his eyes, it was clear he didn't believe a word of it. But Arendor didn't dwell on that. She quickly left the room. A sense of unease enveloped her, quickening her steps without her even realizing it. She simply hadn't expected that. In her haste, thud, she'd crashed straight into Alain, who had just returned from his exile out on the streets. Alain, both hungry and exhausted, was already in a foul mood, and now, of all things, someone had barreled straight into him, as if fate itself had it out for him. Before he could even react, he recognized the person as Arendor. He immediately grabbed her arm, his voice sharp. "Why were you coming out of Father's room? Isn't having Diana and Mother on your side already enough?" Alan had been furious at first, but the moment he grabbed Arendor's arm, he realized something. She was really thin, so thin that a strong gust of wind might just blow her away. "Wait, what have you been eating? Why are you this thin?" Arendor was taken aback. "Hold on. Something about this situation didn't add up." She cleared her throat and quickly explained. "I was looking for the Duke because my friend is arriving at the estate soon." Alain was stunned. "Friend? His name is Jack, a kind and honest knight." Alain sneered, about to make a snide remark, when he noticed something. Arendor's hair was slightly messy. Without thinking, he reached out to fix it for her, his tone casual, as if it were nothing. "It's nothing. There, your hair was just a bit messy." Wait, why is he suddenly being so gentle? Before she could react, she heard a familiar voice call out from behind her. "It's been a while." Arendor spun around instantly. Jack stood there, a hint of amusement in his eyes, but there was something off lurking beneath the surface. Right after, Arendor rushed toward Jack. All the longing and pressure she'd been carrying seemed to burst out in that single moment. "Jack." She grabbed his hand, her eyes sparkling. Jack stiffened for a moment, but quickly smiled, his voice gentle. "Still the same as ever, huh?" But just as they were savoring this reunion, Jack suddenly felt a sharp, icy glare directed straight at him. Turning around, he found Alain standing there, arms crossed, looking at him as if he wanted to bore a hole right through him. "Is this a friend of yours?" Alain's voice couldn't hide his irritation. Before Arendor could answer, Jack had already noticed Alain's hand still resting on Arendor's shoulder. The smile on his face stiffened. A dangerous glint flashed in his eyes. Wait, what exactly is going on here? In her past life, Jack and Alain had been inseparable best friends. She had assumed this life would be the same. Just as the tension in the air began to rise, Arden appeared. Arden immediately shifted his target of attack. He crossed his arms, tilting his chin up as he looked Alain up and down, his tone dripping with mockery. "You're a commoner who couldn't even protect the young lady, and yet you still came back?" Alain didn't argue back. He simply accepted his failure calmly, his expression completely unmoved. This very attitude only irritated Arden further. But then again, he had no idea what else to say. Right at that moment, another voice spoke up. A man stood in the hallway, arms crossed lazily, the corner of his mouth curled into a mocking smile. "Oh, are we highlighting Alain's incompetence yet again?" Alain turned to look at the newcomer, his expression calm. The man shrugged indifferently, making no effort to hide his contempt. "I may be useless, but the vice captain isn't exactly a shining example either, is he?" The atmosphere grew even tenser. Just as the two men were about to lunge at each other, the vice captain suddenly redirected his aggression. He turned to Jack, his gaze sharp. "You should stick to sweeping floors instead of dreaming about becoming a knight. That's enough, he's still just a child." After finishing his tirade, the vice captain felt considerably more pleased with himself. Without waiting for anyone to respond, he turned and walked away, his demeanor relaxed as though he'd just set down a heavy burden. Arden prepared to leave as well. But before they could walk off, Arendor suddenly stepped forward, blocking their path. She looked straight at Arden, her voice deeply serious. "Please tell me why you said the vice captain isn't a good person." It turned out that on the day of the festival, he had suddenly received a suspicious notice from the vice captain. The message was brief, but something about it felt off. "You've been temporarily reassigned. Leave this place immediately." He hadn't understood what was happening, but his instincts told him something was wrong. So instead of obediently following orders, he made a decision to secretly trail the main unit. But in the end, he still arrived too late. The young lady had already run into trouble. He gritted his teeth, his eyes filled with regret and anger. "I swear to both of you, everything I'm saying is the truth." Arendor and Jack watched him closely, saying nothing. He continued, his voice bitter. "A few years ago, when I was still a mercenary, the Duke recognized my worth. But it was from that very moment on," he clenched his fist tightly, "that I became a thorn in the vice captain's side." Jack narrowed his eyes, his voice low as he asked why. Arden let out a bitter laugh, his eyes full of mockery. "Because I don't come from a noble background." As someone of common birth, he had no way to speak up openly and with authority. Even if he knew the truth, so what? Without solid proof, he'd only be accused in return. He could be labeled a liar, or worse, punished directly by the Duke himself. So he chose to stay silent. But now, with things having escalated this far, he could no longer turn a blind eye. After understanding the full situation, Arendor said goodbye to the two of them. But inside her, a fire had already been lit. Arden's story had truly stirred something in her. In her past life, she never had the freedom to choose. But in this life, she would step outside her comfort zone. She wanted to find evidence to expose the vice captain, and at the same time, help eliminate the danger threatening Diana. That day, as usual, Arendor continued working diligently at the Duke's estate. Ever since she'd arrived, the atmosphere here had become noticeably livelier. The maids couldn't help but remark, "Arendor really is a treasure." Ever since she came, our once dull days have become so much more interesting. Absolutely, and she's not just charming, she's also remarkably observant. But her true purpose wasn't simply to make everyone's lives more cheerful. Unlike in her past life, her small stature combined with her harmless, childlike image allowed her to gather information easily without arousing any suspicion. She gradually traced the vice captain's movements and eventually uncovered his true identity. He came from a count's family within the empire. With a title like that, it was no surprise he looked down on Tellin, a man of common birth. Arendor frowned. Someone like that holding so much power. That's truly terrifying. She took a deep breath. At that moment, a sudden thought flashed through her mind. What kind of character would someone raised by a man like that turn out to have? This was starting to get complicated. Before Arendor could even take a deep breath, the Duchess suddenly appeared. And that wasn't all. Diana immediately threw herself into their arms, unleashing her ultimate display of clinginess. Arendor stood nearby, watching with wide, admiring eyes. But before she could pick up any tips, the Duchess caught her red-handed in the act. The Duchess's gaze held a mix of gentleness and something more contemplative, leaving Arendor with the sudden feeling that something wasn't quite right. She quickly lowered her head, pretending nothing had happened, but no one could truly escape the Duchess's watchful eyes. After all, comforting words could only do so much for so long. Arendor decided to head out and find Jack to unload some of her thoughts. No matter what, within this vast estate, Jack was the only person she truly considered a friend. At the very least, they had been close friends in her past life. But the moment she stepped into the hallway, she came upon a sight that was infuriating to witness. A group of young noble boys had surrounded Jack, their faces full of mockery. A commoner who dares to dream of becoming a knight? Only a wandering mercenary like Arden would ever take in someone like him. Their contemptuous words echoed through the air. But Jack simply clenched his fists, refusing to fight back. He paid them no mind, but what he received in return were fists as heavy as sacks of grain. Arendor's heart ached. She rushed forward without hesitation, shielding him with her own body. She stood in front of Jack, exactly the way he had once stood in front of her. Every astonished gaze turned toward her at once. She took a deep breath, then swept her cold, unwavering eyes over the noble boys in front of her. "You cowards! What right do you have to call yourselves knights? Are you trying to challenge the Duke's authority?" Bam. The boys fell silent, utterly unable to find a single word to say in their defense. Just as Arendor started to feel relieved that the boys had been scared off, someone even more formidable appeared, Alain. Oh, great. Talk about the orange peel being thick, but the thorn even sharper. The moment the noble boys spotted Alain approaching, they scrambled toward him, whining like pitiful stray cats. Arendor certainly wasn't going to indulge these little cowards because she was the ultimate boss of this village, not one to be pushed around. A single punch could take any of them down. The instant Arendor's arrogant declaration faded, the entire courtyard fell into a chillingly tense silence. The boys clearly hadn't expected her to be this confident. Then, before the boys could even process her shocking words, Arendor lunged straight at one of them. No joke, she really did lunge. Fortunately, as a reward for this duel, the winner would get to make one request of Alain. The young noble boy eagerly picked up a wooden sword, ready for battle, as if he were about to achieve a legendary feat. But in contrast, Arendor stood perfectly still, not moving an inch. Jack, standing nearby, watched with growing anxiety. Wait, she doesn't even have a weapon. What if she gets hurt? But right at that moment, Arendor pulled something out. A comb? Yes, a comb, a hair comb. Hold on, isn't that the comb meant for combing her little sister's hair? What on earth is this girl doing? Her thin arm held nothing but a comb, looking like it might snap in an instant. The noble boys began murmuring among themselves, some nearly bursting into laughter. But before they could finish laughing, Alain suddenly stepped forward, grabbed the boy's arm, and whispered with an air of mystery. Be smart about this, don't let her get hurt. The boy froze, swallowing nervously. And then the duel officially began. The two stood facing each other. Neither made the first move. The tension was thick enough to hear a leaf fall. The noble boy smirked, about to hurl a taunt. Scared already? Then I'm coming for you. But right at that moment, Arendor charged forward at breathtaking speed. What kind of speed was that? Is something wrong with my eyes? Bam, a critical hit. A strike both fast, powerful, and perfectly precise. The noble boy went down instantly. The entire courtyard gasped. No one could believe their own eyes. Watching this unfold, Alain nearly wet himself from shock. Stop it, hold on, this is supposed to be a demonstration, not a knockout. Arendor dusted off her hands and coldly declared, I've won, so don't forget our agreement. After wrapping up the duel in spectacular fashion, Arendor remembered something important. There was a forgotten garden tucked away behind the Duke's estate. A secret place, a perfect spot to train in magic. And even more importantly, an ideal location to deal with the vice-captain. True to their agreement, the vice-captain soon showed up. Before he could even catch his breath, he realized he'd been tricked. It was none other than Arendor who had lured Alain here, using him as bait to bring the vice-captain along. The vice-captain's face darkened, his icy gaze fixed on the small girl before him. You cunning little brat. Manipulating the young lady wasn't enough. Now you're going after the young master, too. Arendor smiled, calm and full of provocation. Speaking of which, I really should thank you, esteemed vice-captain. If it weren't for you, how else could I have ended up staying by Diana's side? The vice-captain unconsciously clenched his fist. What did you just say? Arendor shrugged, shooting him a mocking glance. You gambled with the young lady's very life just to push Arden out. That took some nerve, didn't it? She kept up the pressure, her words growing louder and louder with each sentence, like a high-powered speaker broadcasting the vice-captain's crimes to the entire world. The vice-captain panicked, immediately gesturing for her to lower her voice. Without proof, don't go spouting nonsense. Even if you happened to be right, no one would believe it anyway. Who would ever take the word of an ant like you seriously? Then a cold voice suddenly rang out. Stop right there, what exactly do you think you're doing? The vice-captain spun around sharply. The Duchess had appeared. The air froze instantly. He broke out in a cold sweat, immediately switching his tone, lowering his voice to explain. I was just disciplining the children, that's all. The Duchess narrowed her eyes, looking him up and down, then delivered a line that completely flipped the situation on its head. Disciplining the children? To me, it looks more like you're trying to silence a witness. And just like that, he was completely stunned. Wait, what is happening here? The truth was, Arendor's plan had gone so smoothly precisely because of the little seeds she'd planted with the Duchess during their afternoon tea a few days earlier. She had skillfully dropped hints of information, turning the Duchess into an unexpected ally. It seems like the garden out back has started sprouting again. A casual remark, but one that planted the seed of suspicion firmly in the Duchess's mind. On top of that, the Duchess herself had been wanting to strengthen her bond with the Duke. So during their walks together, she often brought up interesting little topics from daily life. As a result, today the Duchess arrived at just the right moment to catch the vice-captain in the act. If not, Arendor would likely have had to report this to the Duke on her own, but the impact wouldn't have been nearly as dramatic or shocking as it turned out to be. The vice-captain's face went pale as paper, while Arendor thought to herself, what a beautifully executed move. Earlier, to reach this point, Arendor had defeated Alain's lackeys and earned the chance to make one request. But when Alain learned that her request was to meet the vice-captain, he clearly grew uneasy. To avoid embarrassing the Duke's household, Alain reluctantly agreed. But how could he possibly stay calm about it? He secretly kept watch, his eyes fixed on Arendor, wanting to see exactly what she was planning. But the more he watched, the more conflicted he felt. Wait, why do I keep getting led around by this girl over and over again? At that moment, the Duchess pulled Arendor aside, her eyes gentle but her tone firm. Don't let this happen again." It sounded like a scolding, but every word the Duchess spoke carried such unexpected warmth that Arendor felt cared for, as if by a mother. But her true purpose wasn't just to seek justice for Jack and Alain. It was because she wanted to repay the kindness of the Duke's family for raising her, and in her past life to prove her own worth. Arendor had thoroughly studied everything during her time at the Intelligence Bureau. Among it all, one particular report stood out. The vice captain of the Night Order, embezzling funds, evading justice. So he was a textbook case of corruption after all? This time, she had helped the Duke's family eliminate this threat before it could grow worse. Watching the vice captain's ashen face as he was exposed, Arendor couldn't help but think to herself, what a shame there wasn't a camera around. This historic moment truly deserved to be captured. In recognition of this remarkable achievement, the Duchess decided to reward Arendor with something special. She brought her to the Tower of Magic, a place not everyone was permitted to enter. The moment they reached the entrance, the Archmage Tellin sensed something and stepped out. His face lit up with excitement as though he'd just spotted a delicious treat. "Here to become my disciple, are you?" He looked Arendor over from head to toe, chuckling with delight. "Little Arendor, the Duke told me you didn't want to be my student." I honestly didn't believe him. Arendor thought to herself, "Here we go again. There's really no escaping this." But just as she opened her mouth to protest, another voice cut in sharply. "Get a grip, Tellin. Arendor is here for treatment." Before she could even process what was happening, Tellin swiftly waved his hand, casting a spell faster than winning a lottery draw. Boom! A brilliant light enveloped Arendor, and before she could react, she felt the pain vanish completely, as though it had never existed at all. It was only then that Arendor realized the person before her was the very mage who had treated her while she was unconscious. She looked up at Tellin, her eyes filled with suspicion. "Your magic is clearly powerful, but does your friendliness really need to be this intense?" Well now, who else would be this warm toward a total stranger? Could this be some kind of debt from a past life catching up to me? To win Arendor over, everyone decided to take her up to the very top of the magic tower for a tour. But there was one small problem. This tower was as tall as a skyscraper. Climbing all the way to the top might make her pass out from low blood sugar before the tour even started. Just as everyone hesitated, they asked her if she wanted to go up. Arendor looked at them, puzzled, then blurted out an innocent question. Why not just use a teleportation spell to get up there? In that instant, the entire room fell silent. Everyone froze. What did she just say? Archmage Tellin cleared his throat and looked at Arendor with disbelief. "Young lady, teleportation magic isn't something for children to use casually. To cast it, you need to recite the incantation, draw the magic circle, and carefully calibrate the energy. Just memorizing the incantation alone takes an enormous amount of time, not to mention actually retaining it." Hearing this, Arendor was stunned. She blinked a few times, then muttered to herself, "Wait, isn't magic supposed to be something you can just activate on a whim?" She was caught off guard, but looking around, everyone's expressions were completely serious. This, it seemed, was no joke. In that moment, Arendor's entire worldview came crashing down. It turned out that everything she thought she knew about magic had been completely wrong. Wait a second, then who am I? Where am I? What world is this? On the way back, Arendor sank into deep thought, her mind spinning like an overheating CPU. Every question imaginable flooded her brain. Based on what she knew, the only archmage capable of using teleportation without an incantation was the Grand Duke of the Pilous Duchy. So then, where did her magical advantage come from? Was she a once-in-a-millennium genius, or had she once belonged to an entirely different system of magic from this world? But the more she thought about it, the more confused she became. Throughout her many years working at the Intelligence Bureau, she had always been confident there was nothing in the world she didn't know. Except perhaps the true name of the chairman. So then, what kind of secret was she actually carrying? But it was only after being betrayed and dying that Arendor realized she had spent all those years living inside a web of lies. She once believed she was in control of everything, but it turned out she had merely been a pawn in someone else's game. This time, however, she would be the one setting the board. Before long, the Duke personally summoned a meeting to punish the vice-captain. Such a rare gathering left the nobles seated in the room unable to hide their unease. Everyone exchanged secretive glances, trying to guess what was about to unfold. The Duke stood still at the center of the great hall, his gaze drifting toward his father's statue, an undercurrent of emotion churning within him. All of this was because of your incompetence, and now the Duke's household has been undermined by these people. He remembered the harsh years of his past, stepping onto the battlefield at just 18 years old, tearing apart, piece by piece, the corrupt web of power to reclaim his family's standing. With help from the Pilus family and his wife's family, he had managed to restore his title. He sat down, his voice low but carrying immense weight. "Everyone, please be seated." As expected, the Countess was the first to jump up, her voice sharp with indignation. "Why have you imprisoned my son?" The Duke simply smiled faintly, a hint of mockery in his expression. "This hasn't even been announced publicly yet, so how could you possibly know?" At that same moment, the vice captain was brought in, stumbling unsteadily into the room, his eyes sweeping over the assembled nobles, before settling on the Duke. Confused and terrified, he had no idea what was happening. But before he could speak, another furious voice rang out. "This is simply unacceptable. How could the Duke treat a knight under his command this way?" How amusing, calling himself a knight. The remark was light, yet as sharp as a blade, cutting through the still air and sending the entire hall into shock. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, all eyes gradually turning toward the vice captain. No explanation was needed. Everyone understood at once. He had committed an unforgivable act. But no one had expected he'd dare abuse his authority to personally reassign Arden, the young lady's own bodyguard. This was nothing short of poking a sleeping tiger. The Countess turned pale with rage. Without a word, she grabbed a chair and swung it straight down at her own son. "You disgraceful child, how dare you do something like this?" The loud crash made everyone present gasp sharply. No one dared step in, because this time, not even the gods themselves could save him. After the blow, the Countess stood in the middle of the hall, her gaze cold as ice, declaring before all the assembled nobles, "From this day forward, I sever all ties with him as my son." Not stopping there, the Duke leaned back casually in his chair, his tone relaxed yet carrying a sharp edge. "That's not all. The embezzlement of public funds to purchase mining rights, that had something to do with you too, didn't it, Countess?" The entire hall erupted in shock. The very woman who had just struck her son with a chair was herself behind the corruption scandal. Everyone present looked utterly stunned. The Countess could no longer maintain her proud composure. Her knees buckled as she collapsed to the floor, her voice trembling as she pleaded, "Your Grace, I've been wrongly accused. I know nothing about this." But pleading was useless. In this game of power, there was no room for the weak. The meeting ended in a heavy, oppressive silence. The Duke paid no more attention to those who had just been exposed, quietly leading his family for a walk through the garden out back. Beneath the setting sun, he calmly shared the fate that awaited the Countess and her son. The Duchess smiled with satisfaction, her voice gentle yet carrying an undertone of cold resolve. "Anyone who bullies Arendor deserves death. No exceptions, no matter who they are." Those words struck Arendor to the very depths of her heart. In that instant, a warm feeling spread through her chest, as if she were truly protected, truly loved. Her eyes stung slightly, but she immediately reminded herself, "Don't let your guard down now." Because from the very moment she decided to start over, she had sworn never to let herself be bound by anyone again. If that was the case, she needed to bury this feeling she shouldn't be having. But upon learning that the Duke and Duchess would be heading to the capital the following week, Arendor's heart felt as though it had been doused with cold water. It wasn't that she didn't want to go to the capital, it was because the Duchess would die not long after arriving there. In her past life, the Duchess had passed away just 1 year after relocating to the capital. And back then, Arendor had been far too consumed with her own affairs to truly pay attention. She had once assumed it was simply the fate of a frail, sickly woman, but now, seeing the Duchess so vibrant and healthy, she was certain that death hadn't been so simple after all. Among the nobility, there were rumors that the Duchess's family background wasn't particularly prestigious. Her marriage to the Duke had faced no shortage of scorn and ridicule. Moving to the glamorous capital would be like throwing her straight into a den of wolves. Just as Arendor found herself lost in thought, a gentle voice pulled her back to reality. "Come on, let's go have some fun." The Duchess was, as always, gentle and thoughtful, completely unaware that an unseen hand was already targeting her. Following Arden's lead, the Duchess boarded the carriage first, but just as Arendor moved to follow, she was stopped by someone entirely unexpected. The man before her bowed his head slightly. his voice low but carrying a rare sincerity. "I wanted to say thank you. I owe you a great debt of gratitude either way. If there's ever anything you need from me, Arendor, please don't hesitate to ask." His tone made Arendor pause for a moment. Isn't this scene a little off? But before she could react further, the man turned and called out loudly. "By the way, Jack, no more hiding. Come on out. I've already taken this kid on as my apprentice. I'm confident that within just a few years, he'll become a full-fledged knight." A familiar figure emerged from behind, his cheeks slightly flushed with embarrassment. Jack, the young man she had come to know, was about to become a true knight. Arendor couldn't contain her excitement and rushed over to clap him firmly on the shoulder. "Seriously, that's amazing. Congratulations." This proud young man, unable to handle the praise, blushed as red as a tomato and scurried off as if someone were chasing him with a knife. Watching Jack's retreating figure, Arendor couldn't help but laugh. He really is adorable. In the carriage, the Duchess, ever thoughtful, had barely settled in before gently pulling out a box of snacks and placing it in Arendor's hands. "Have a little something? It's still a long way to the shopping district." Before long, everyone arrived at the bustling city center, as lively as a street festival. The moment the Duchess stepped down from the carriage, her elegant, refined bearing left the crowd murmuring in admiration. Meanwhile, Arendor was still clumsily climbing down without a shred of grace. But just before she could turn her landing into a complete disaster, Jack swooped in to catch her with dramatic flair, as if he were already a true knight. The moment her feet touched the ground safely, a shout rang out. "No way, the princess belongs to me, I'm her knight." Little Diana rushed forward and bit straight into Jack's hand, nearly making him jump out of his skin. The scene was so comical that Arendor almost choked on the snack she was eating. To soothe the little princess who was so forcefully asserting her ownership, the Duchess quickly bought cotton candy for everyone. She handed out the candy with a soft smile. "Sugar can help keep a child in check, and in the meantime, I can start my shopping spree." So this was the secret technique of parents everywhere. Even just window shopping made her feel wealthy. While the Duchess tried on outfits, the store staff quickly began tailoring clothes for Arendor as well. She glanced at the price tag and nearly fainted. "Wait, hold on, this is way too expensive." But the staff calmly delivered the final word. "This is nothing. The outfit you're currently wearing was custom-tailored too, you know." So it turned out she had unknowingly stepped into the world of people who spent money like Tellen, without even realizing it. Just then, Diana ran over to show off her new dress. Once dressed, the girl looked exactly like a tiny young lady, so much so that passers-by couldn't help but glance at her twice. But just as the cheerful mood settled in, an argument suddenly broke out behind them. A wealthy young lady was snapping irritably at a staff member, her tone dripping with sharp, biting sarcasm. Arendor, thoroughly enjoying the free drama unfolding before her, was caught off guard when the girl suddenly spun around, pointing the tip of her shoe straight at her. "Don't just stand there staring." Arendor had no idea what was happening, but instinctively wrapped her arms around Diana and stepped back, like a frightened little cat. Fortunately, a woman with an icy, composed presence arrived just in time. She gave only a light glance, her voice calm but carrying an invisible weight of authority. "That's enough, stop causing trouble." The wealthy girl pouted, clearly still fuming, but upon hearing that the Duchess herself was present, she swallowed her anger and reluctantly walked away. But before leaving, she shot a glance full of malice toward Arendor. "Wait, what did I even do? Why does she suddenly seem to recognize my face?" A few days later, the important banquet finally arrived, and Arendor had no way to back out now. She and Diana put on custom-tailored outfits, luxurious yet still tastefully elegant. The Duchess smiled gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're an important member of this family now. There's no need to worry." Her words felt as warm as a cozy blanket on a winter day, yet Arendor still felt the weight of pressure bearing down on her. Even having been accepted into the family, the shadow of her past still made her feel out of place in this world of splendor. "Sister, come a little closer." While she was still lost in thought, Diana suddenly tugged at her hand. Before Arendor could react, the girl had already gently pinned a pink hairpin into her soft hair. "This suits you perfectly." Arendor was startled, feeling something stir gently within her heart. She turned to look into the mirror. The reflection staring back left her stunned. A young lady in a gorgeous dress, her eyes soft and gentle, her hair adorned with a delicate little hairpin. In that moment, she looked just like a fairy stepping straight out of a storybook. She had begun to believe that perhaps this time she could truly reach out and grasp happiness. But reality always had a way of delivering a painful slap. Just as she was savoring this rare, peaceful moment, a cold gust of wind swept in. Arendor felt a sharp, piercing gaze sweep over her, carrying undeniable anger. She turned her head. It was Alain. The moment his eyes landed on the hairpin in her hair, his already cold expression grew even more terrifying. Without saying a word, he strode toward her. Before Arendor could react, his strong hand reached out and roughly yanked the hairpin from her hair. The banquet hall froze instantly. Alain had always been cold and arrogant, but no one had ever seen him this furious before. The Duchess immediately stepped in to intervene, her voice gentle yet carrying real authority. Diana pinned that hairpin on Arendor herself. She's done nothing wrong. Diana's eyes turned red, and she stomped her foot in anger. Apologize right now. I hate you. Don't ever show your face in front of our family again. Alain clenched his hand tightly, his gaze lowering. Everyone could see his jaw clenched hard, as though he were suppressing a storm raging inside him. After a moment, he reluctantly muttered an apology, though his tone remained stiff and forced. No one could tell what was going through his mind, only that the moment he finished speaking, he turned and walked away, his retreating figure colder than a northern winter. The heavy atmosphere was almost suffocating. After a long silence, the Duchess sighed softly, her eyes filled with lingering regret. I'm sorry, Arendor. I wasn't thoughtful enough about this. Her voice was gentle but heavy with emotion. This hairpin was originally a birthday gift Alain had given to his sister. I bear some responsibility for this too. Go ahead to the banquet hall first. Diana and I will join a little later. Arendor quietly clasped her hands together and nodded silently. Coming into this family, she had thought she'd finally found a peaceful refuge, but it turned out the storms had never truly stopped. Amid the elegant atmosphere of the banquet, a quiet battle was already underway. A wealthy young lady wore a stunning dress, yet her expression was full of displeasure. This dress isn't even the finest one here. She kept complaining, constantly adjusting her outfit while scanning the room. The man beside her waved his hand irritably. Stop talking nonsense. What matters right now is making a strong impression in front of the Duke's daughter. His eyes gleamed with calculation. Now that the Count's family has fallen, the Duke's estate needs capable people. If some commoner ends up stealing all the spotlight, our family will struggle to reclaim its former glory. Understand? The girl clenched her fist tightly, her eyes betraying a flash of jealousy. The Baron's family has arrived. Letitia calmly straightened her outfit, her sharp gaze sweeping across the entire hall. She was searching for any sign of the Duke's daughter, and after a moment of observation, Letitia spotted a girl in a noble's dress standing nearby. In Letitia's mind, this was undoubtedly the person she needed to approach. She hurried forward, ready to introduce herself, but as she drew closer, the girl's face left Letitia frozen in shock. Why is she here?